got any minutes of the last meeting because it was online, so we're going to go straight into the main business of the evening, and that is to introduce Tony Wilmott, who is a Newcastle upon Tyne graduate. He's worked for Historic England for many years under its different manifestations, I think is perhaps the way to put it. He was, of course, Archaeologist of the Year in 2012. He's excavated very widely in Britain, particularly on Hadrian's Wall, a topic on which he is regarded as a renowned expert. Also Chester Amphitheatre and Richborough, which of course is the topic of his talk to us tonight, recent excavations in the Amphitheatre, fort and town of Richborough. Tony.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody. This evening I want to speak predominantly about the recent work by the Archaeological Investigation Team of Historic England, which I'm a part, undertaken in 2020 and 2021, COVID permitting. It was like that, you know, in response to a request from English Heritage Trust, that's why their logo's up there as well, who needed additional research work to be undertaken to inform their current complete overhaul of the visitor facilities and the interpretation of the site, which is currently ongoing, with the interpretation due to reopen in spring this year. Last thing I heard, it was the end of April. The talk is going to concentrate principally on the work on the amphitheatre, but a certain amount of background is necessary to sort of set the work in context. And I'm aware that I keep saying last year. When I say last year, please understand, I mean 2021, because it's only 11 days in. So, you know, last year is year before last, or something like that. BC, COVID, you know, it does things to your brain. But yes, when you had a visit to Kent, I did give a Zoom lecture at that time, which some of this talk tonight will duplicate and expand as we go through. So first of all, the location of the site. It's situated here on the Wonsum Channel, the former navigable channel that separated the mainland and the Isle of Thanet there, on a small island within what was water but is now largely mudflat and indeed land. The Wonsum Channel long backfilled and silted. In 1776, William Stukeley's illustration shows the site from a sort of imagined aerial perspective and shows what were in his days, and still are to some extent, the main features of the site. Here we see the outer walls, three sides of the outer walls, north, south and west, of the Saxon Shore fort, Roman Saxon Shore fort, Lakes fort, the cruciform thing in the middle, which confused antiquarians and archaeologists for actually centuries until what it was identified in the 50s, and we'll come back to that later. And of course there, the amphitheatre, which sort of looms over the site like Vesuvius in this image, but you can almost forgive Stukeley because he was one of the first to identify it as an amphitheatre, and indeed it was one of the three first amphitheatres to be identified as such by Stukeley in Britain, the other two being Cirencester and Silchester. Doesn't quite look like that, but as you see, the amphitheatre, the walls and the cruciform structure are still, to this day, the prominent features. The amphitheatre on a relatively high point, but nowhere near as dramatic as Stukeley said it is. Now the fort, as you see it there, obviously somewhat different to Stukeley's image, apart from the cruciform thing in the middle, is laid out today as a sort of multi-period palimpsest derived from the excavations undertaken by J.P Bushe-Fox in the 1920s and 1930s, and famously published in the 5 volumes, the last one written by Barry Cunliffe. And of course that excavation concentrated on the visible part of the site, There it is again with the railway line. We'll talk about the railway line. The River Stour in the foreground, which is the, if you like, the remains of the Wonsum Channel in this area. A variety of ditches and building foundations within the former fort and the external ditches. Let's say derived from Bushe-Fox's excavation. This is one of his aerial photographs from 1927, excavating widely inside the walls of the Saxon Shore fort and around the ditches around the outside. Now, we have a problem with what to call Richborough. Generally, it's known as Richborough Roman Fort. If you go down there and look at an English heritage sign, or the yearbook, or even not quite the guidebook, because I wrote that and I didn't call it that. It's called a Richborough Roman Fort, and it's previously called Richborough Castle. This has sort of resulted in a kind of general view that it's a Roman military site, a purely Roman military site. But there's a lot more to it than that. It does have two Roman military phases, but these are widely separated in time. Famously, the earliest of these features, the earliest features that Bushe-Fox found, were a pair of linear ditches which were traced, as you see, well beyond the fort walls and which were dated to the Claudian period. These are interpreted, still interpreted, they're not without controversy, as a bridgehead defence associated with the landing of the Claudian invasion in AD 43. And Bushe-Fox traced the ditches there within this is his plan of the Claudian ditches within the area of the later Saxon Shore fort, with the single, the post holes of the single gate through the ditches, heading off to the west. In 2020, on the cusp of the first lockdown, in fact, we were supposed to kick off this excavation campaign on March the 24th, 2020. So that worked. We all know what happened on that day. I actually had to, I found out that it was cancelled on the Wednesday before we were due to deploy on Monday the 24th. First thing I had to do was ring 12 people and told them that their contracts of employment had been cancelled before they took them up, which was not something I want to do again. But we did have a few of our core staff and some supervisors on site over the weekend. We'd laid everything out. So we were able to do one of the things that English Heritage asked us to do, which was to re-examine the post holes of that timber gate. And we can see here that we excavated one, the bottom right, the re-excavation of the post pit, one of the original post pits that Bushe-Fox had identified as being the four supporting posts for the timber gate. The slide above is Bushe-Fox's photograph of the foot square, 30 centimetre square socket of the original post set in this really big pit, which is about 1.3 metres cube. And that's packed with sand and rubble and stuff to hold up that very substantial post. The one marked C on the original Bushe-Fox plan, the blue is our plan of re-excavation, was completely removed by what he calls Pit 120, and we fully excavated Pit 120, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Now, in any re-excavation, the archaeology of the archaeology is always interesting, and that was also true here. The backfilled post pits were neatly edged with cobbles by Bushe-Fox to make them stand out, and in one of them, it was marked with a timber pole. There was a stump of a piece of 2x2 timber in there, probably set in order to demonstrate the site, possibly to the Society of Antiquaries, who actually were the sponsors of the excavation. Imagine them coming and Bushe-Fox going, oh, here we've got this timber gateway. Online, as you can see, with the Wattling Street, it's the beginning of the Wattling Street, heading off there between those a couple of rows of houses and trees in the background, and the west gate of the later Saxon Shore fort there is following the same line. So, AD 43, this is the first of the two military phases, short-lived military phase. The second, of course, is represented by the spectacular walls of the Saxon Shore fort, dating to the last quarter of the 3rd century. So there's a period of 2.5 centuries in between these phases. Note on this plan the hypothesized eastern wall of the fort, and also the feature there labelled as unfinished foundation. This was the interpretation for various complex stratigraphic reasons that I won't go into of this foundation and the wall that comes from Bushe-Fox. An interpretation actually which dates all the way back to this plan drawn by William Boys in 1799, noted Sandwich antiquarian. We'll be talking about him in a bit later as well. Obviously, yet again, it's the walls and the cruciform thing in the middle that attracts Boys' attention. 2008, we checked the hypothesis of the position of the east wall by examining the fallen wall beneath, at a lower level beneath the fort remains, which Bushe-Fox had examined, but only in a very, very cursory way. The angle of repose of that fallen wall, there it is. You can see the base of it is actually concrete with a lot of chalk flecks on it, and this wall has collapsed. The mass of concrete and flint has collapsed from a chalk foundation, so it's split away from the foundation at the point where the materials have changed. And the angle of repose showed that it's actually impossible for it to have fallen over in situ at that point, because it would have had to have sort of fallen over and gone like that to achieve that present position. It's less than a 90-degree collapse at that point. So it's fallen from somewhere up there. And the logic is that it's fallen actually from what was known as the unfinished foundation. And work by myself, and particularly a young colleague, Phil Smither, has shown that the stratigraphic reasons for thinking that the foundation was unfinished are not really valid. And in a recent volume of Britannia, we published this plan, which is more like what we're dealing with here. Happily, this would put the whole fort on one level rather than terrace down towards the sea, which is a far more happy way in which it could work. So to summarise the evidence of the Bushe-Fox excavation, we've got a military phase AD 43, another military phase dating to the construction of this in, say, 275, thereabouts, the final part of the 3rd century, 250 years in the middle, which morphed from a military supply base into a fully fledged town. And Bushe-Fox said this must have been a major port town. And here we have the phases published by Cunliffe, Claudian supply base, early Flavian period with a lot of granaries, which are either, depending on the way you look at it, either supplying stuff coming in or stockpiling stuff going out of the province, or a bit of both, however you prefer to look at it. The late Flavian period, you've got timber buildings which have been burned, you've got roads laid out, and other structures developing. In fact, Bushe-Fox excavated 327 pits in all, finds from which extended from the 1st to the 4th century. So you have a continuing occupation through within the area of the later Saxon Shore fort. Bottom left, the late Flavian, you've got the cruciform structure there. In the late 3rd century, that was basically town buildings were demolished in order to put these 3 ditches and presumably a rampart around this structure in order to defend it as a defence, and this prefigured the development of the late 3rd century Saxon Shore fort. As is well known, really, the cruciform feature was proved by Ian Richmond and Donald Strong to be a huge quadriformes arch, one of the biggest in the Roman Empire, originally covered in a veneer of white Italian Carrara marble, which when one excavates around Richborough, one finds little bits of Carrara marble all over the place, in just about every archaeological feature, from when the monument was torn down and reused for the building of the Saxon Shore fort. I can march to a number of places around the walls of the shore fort. We can see little bits of Carrara marble moulding sticking out of the concrete, and doubtless the marble was kilned down to provide the lime to make the concrete for the fort. Conventionally, the arch has been dated to the Flavian period, late Flavian period, Domitian, that sort of period. But again, Philip Smither, who was working with me on the plan and has done an enormous amount of work now on the site notebooks, on the stratigraphy, re-examining all the stratigraphy, has come to the conclusion, I think, although it was Flavian when I went to school, and it's one of those things you don't want to give up particularly, he is coming round to the idea that it's more likely to be something like Hadrianic. So, you know, more of that when Phil publishes his material. Given that we've got these two phases flanking the town, it's worth remembering that those 327 pits of Bushe-Fox's, yes, they got finds in them. Yes, they are cut from different archaeological levels. But, of course, those excavations are a thing of their time. And if we look at the sample from Bushe-Fox's pit 120, the one that takes out one of those post holes of the gate, and we look at this archaeobotanical sample, I could have also put in animal bone lists from that pit. But from that whole area of excavation, these are the only archaeobotanical and archaeozoological samples in existence, the ones that we took on the fringe of lockdown. So, having said that, what about what goes on outside the walls of the Saxon Shore fort? Well, the known archaeology around Richborough in 1968, when Cunliffe published Richborough 5, was, as you can see, pretty sparse. We've got the amphitheatre down at the bottom, of course, two temples there, a little bit of cemetery. Over on the far side, I'll just use the pointer. Building on air photograph, just the one. Area excavated by Dowker in 1887, little building there. What you can see here, of course, is that the road system that you can see going beyond the walls of the fort placed on top of it has actually taken out about 6 insulae of this Roman town. So the Roman town must extend beyond. And one thing that's always forgotten, in Charles Roach-Smith's book, which we'll talk about a lot later on, the Antiquities of Richborough, Reculver and Lim, published in 1850, he draws this plan of a very substantial, these are flint and tile walls, very substantial Roman building which sat in the track bed of the railway about there. There are various views that Roach-Smith publishes, and he says in his text, it's near this bit. So as far as you look at the view again and try and work out exactly where that is, but it's right off on the low part, down on the bottom there, which is interesting. So that was the condition in 68, and then in 2001, Historic English Heritage, as we were then, did major geophysical survey, and you can see all kinds of stuff going on. I've highlighted those 1968 roads here in green, but you can see they go well beyond. There's all kinds of stuff going on out here and out here. And as well as the geophysical survey, we also carried out aerial photographic reconstruction. There's not just one building on the aerial photograph, there are lots, all kinds of stuff, enclosures and stuff going on all the way between the late fort, which is superimposed on this palimpsest, right the way down to the amphitheatre. So lots going on, big town, actually 21 hectares of archaeology around the fort. And here's a reconstruction by Peter Lorimer of the town of Richborough with the arch in the middle and the amphitheatre on its fringe. It's an imaginative reconstruction, of course, but you get the idea. So in 2001, we wanted to examine the flank of the island, of the site. So we dug these two trenches, Trench A and Trench B. Trench A was examined the temples that Bushe-Fox had excavated in 1932 and dated to the 4th century. Well, you can see Bushe-Fox's excavation trench around here and around here. We got this wall cut by this pit, which contained 4th century material. It's almost as if Bushe-Fox was dating the temple from the date of the contents of 4th century pits that were actually cut through the temple, which is a bit odd. We could also see in this elevation the point at which the foundation and the superstructure were separate. About there, you've got clay bonding beneath that point, chalk masonry, and then pink mortar above, and a certain amount of pink mortar also covering the soft chalk of the walls. And it seems likely that actually this is actually quite early. We could also show the level from which these foundations were cut. And there are a couple of phases of largely colluvium spreading over the site in between phases of pitting, which post-date the building of the temple. And this idea of colluvium is something that we'll see a lot of. This is our Trench B. World War II trenches around the flank of the island, defending the guns and so forth, which are their anti-aircraft guns defending Manston, of course, which was a front line Battle of Britain aerodrome. Corrugated iron in the bottom of the trenches. There's a memoir of one of the soldiers that said that they were asked to sift all the soil from their trenches for antiquities, or for civilization. You've got to do that even at the height of the Battle of Britain, which is when it was. They would have had very slim pickings from these trenches had they sifted all this mass of colluvial deposits, because 1.78 metres depth of colluvial hill wash contained virtually nothing in the way of fines. Okay, we machined it off, but metal detected it and looked through it and sampled it and so forth. Virtually nothing until it got down, after that 1.78 metres from the surface, to 3rd or 4th century Roman surfaces here. And that actually showed that far from having this sort of cliff edge effect, which has always been claimed for Richborough, the natural ground surface in the 4th century sloped evenly from the top through Area B to this area here, where Bushe-Fox's railway cutting stone building was. So this again is interesting, and of course it also shows that in the 3rd, 4th century you have occupation going right up into this fringe area on the site, although Roachsmith's building doesn't look terribly fringe, if you like. So the amphitheatre, what you've all been waiting for. This is the amphitheatre as it looks today from the air. A sort of grass-covered bagel, but very, very prominent. And when you walk over it, you really do get that feeling of the ups and the downs. The first reference to the amphitheatre was by John Leland, Henry VIII's antiquary, of course, who described the Saxon Shore fort and what he thought was a circular fortification lying a bowshot away, which is, of course, what we're looking at here. And a chart of Thanet and Sandwich dated 1548, virtually contemporary with Leland, clearly shows the fort and the amphitheatre in that sort of miniature, in this manuscript in the British Library. The first mention of it as an amphitheatre was by William Gostling in his book about the environs of Canterbury in 1774, when he shows it on the map like that and describes it as an amphitheatre. And of course, as we've already seen, Stukely picks up this theme of the amphitheatre in Itinerarium Curiosum, shows the two illustrations, the prospect from with the amphitheatre looking like Vesuvius, and this other prospect of the earthwork itself looking quite prominent. Now, we now go to 1849, and we go to the discovery of the amphitheatre as such, the proof that it was an amphitheatre. And this is published in the Kentish Gazette here in November 1984, when William Henry Rolfe, a noted Sandwich antiquary, 3 times Mayor of Sandwich, a considerable collector of local antiquities, and a great friend, of course, of the archaeologist Charles Roach Smith. Roach Smith with also Fairholt, who was Roach Smith's illustrator, bear in mind this is 1849, visit Mr. Rolfe of Sandwich, whose labours and discoveries on the site of the Roman town are well known to the public. That gentleman determined on continuing his excavations. So they all went down to the shoreline underneath the east wall, the non-existent east wall of the fort, hoping they'd find the foundations of the landing place, the Roman landing place. And they failed. This attempt was attended with no satisfactory results, but the abandonment of it led to a discovery of great interest and importance, because on their way back from this excavation, they were walking over what the circular depression in the ground, which the antiquary Stukely conjectured to be the site of an amphitheatre, and approved by some and ridiculed by others, having nothing hitherto but presumption to support it. They love these texts. So Rolfe and Fairholt and Smith decided just to, well, Smith discovered amid the newly ploughed soil a fragment of mortar on the edge of the circle, which his practised eye judged immediately to be proof that there was masonry of some kind or other underneath. The workmen were immediately employed in digging on the spot, and they came in a very short time to the remains of a wall, which in the course of the day was traced to the extent of 60 or 70 feet in such a shape and direction as to leave no doubt that it was the outer wall of a very extensive circular building, which enclosed the depression in the ground observed by former antiquaries. We consider, therefore, that the conjecture that this was an amphitheatre is entirely confirmed, and we look forward with the greatest interest to the result of subsequent excavations, which cannot but be carried out as successfully under the directions of Mr. Roach Smith and Mr. Rolfe. Great, they've found the amphitheatre. And as I said, Fairholt, who came with them, was Roach Smith's illustrator, and the book, The Antiquities of Richborough, Reculver and Limb, were published in 1850. So that's the year after the discovery of the amphitheatre in late autumn, early winter of 1849. And indeed, Roach Smith dedicated the book to Rolfe, because a lot of the material in the book, most of the material in the book, was from Rolfe's collections. So this was actually this visit that they made, that Smith and Fairholt made to Rolfe, was in the nature of a recce in preparation for the book. This was, I think, what was going on. The account of the amphitheatre in the book published in 1850, the account of the excavation, is quoted verbatim from Rolfe's letter to Roach Smith, which is now in this building. I was looking at it this afternoon. Presumably it was put in unaltered, just in quotes, the whole letter, simply because Roach Smith was in a hurry to get the book out and published. So it was put in there because it needed to be in there. But this means we have this full eyewitness account absolutely as written by Rolfe in Roachsmith's book. I managed to acquire a copy of it last week from Abe Books. It's jolly good. And of course, here we have a plan of what was found. And the plan was used in the book. These are the illustrations of the amphitheatre used accompanying Rolf's letter in the book. You've got a plan, we have profiles, we have elevations. The elevations on the left-hand side there, I think must be the work of Fairholt, who presumably visited and recorded them the following year as the work went on. The plan was surveyed by, well, Roachsmith says surveyed by Mr. Coleman, a local land surveyor. So we had a bit of a poke around and we found John Noakes Coleman of Goshall, which is about 1.5 miles away from Richborough. He's 24 years old when he made this plan, but at 21 he'd drawn up a detailed tithe map of the parish of Ash, which still hangs on the wall of Goshall, and the present Mr. Coleman, who is still there. I was delighted to hear that his ancestor had, he's not direct line, he's uncle, several times removed, but nonetheless his ancestor had such a big part in this work. And a further original record of the work on the east entrance was found as recently as 2021 in Sandwich Museum. And these extraordinary documents showing a part of the entrance there of the amphitheatre with a skeleton that sat on over the wall, which is mentioned in Rolf's letter rather to Roachsmith. The skeleton's mentioned. This is the only drawn record of it, and it fell out of a copy of Roachsmith's book in Sandwich Museum, which was the original receipts in it. It was sold directly from Roachsmith to J.Y. Ackerman, who was at the time the secretary of the Society of Antiquaries of London and the editor of Archaeologia. So it's all kept in the family, as it were. And this was only found, last year. So this is really useful. In 2021, we did a geophysical survey of the amphitheatre. We see here the resistivity survey, which obviously shows the circuit of the amphitheatre, the oval of the amphitheatre with entrances at each short axis and these lumps on the long axis and these lumps on the short axis, which we thought must be parts of major structures. Now, the problem we had was, of course, the two plans, our plan and the Coleman plan, were different north points. But my colleague Neil Linford recognised that actually if Coleman had been surveying using a compass, the movement of magnetic north might have affected the plan, so he corrected magnetic north to what it is today, and as you see in red, the Coleman plan fitted much better. We also did a magnetometry survey. This is the magnetometer survey. You can see that the results are completely complementary to the res, in that I've put on the outline of the arena wall of the amphitheatre, which we now know is what Rolf was excavating. And you can see that on the northern side there, there's these very strong magnetic anomalies. We were slightly concerned they might be World War II features. And then other features which are sort of curving around the amphitheatre, look like ditches or buildings. So the excavation took place eventually, after 2 cancellations due to COVID, in September to November 2021. The idea being that the trench would look at one of these blobs on the short axis and also cover or sample the area of what looked like structures or ditches behind. And this is the eventual location of the trench against the resistivity, and this is the same against the mag. And you can see from these what we were attempting to achieve, the blob there and the high-res anomalies at the back of the amphitheatre there, and this area sampling what was going on behind it. We couldn't find the amphitheatre. The initial machine trench, we couldn't find the amphitheatre. It's there somewhere. We're taking a trench from the top of the bank down into the arena, and all we got was brown silt. There's natural sand there. That was encouraging on the top of the hill. Brown sandy silt and just a band where the sandy silt had chalk flecks in it. So our only option was the brown sandy silt with the chalk flecks. So we went a little bit deeper, and there you can see the brown sandy silt, the amphitheatre wall, and Rolf's Trench. The only difference in Rolf's Trench from this material here is that it's got these chalk flecks in. So this was a bit of a dry mouth moment, if you like, as was this, because the initial machining showed that our circular structures, which we thought might be towers and complex entrances, were banks of natural pebble beds. In other words, they were geological, not structural in any way, which was disappointing. But we began work on segments of the arena chalk wall that was revealed by the original machining, and we were finding, again, as that last slide, that the material covering it is absolutely consistent to depth. And it was then that it rained heavily, and the area here, this nice straight section we got, just slumped. The Thanet bed's pebbles washed out of the sand, and the sand, the soil, this is 24 hours of rain, the soil just washed out in these great fans. The soil is extremely light, extremely mobile, and the farmer confirmed that it's light and mobile. This was demonstrating the formation process, and we theorized at this point that what was going on here was, as the natural ground level, the arena, of course, is dug out of the natural ground, and the material from the arena thrown up against the outer wall, we'll come to the outer wall in a minute, to form seating bank. The arena wall then, if that then was robbed or collapsed, would mean that the material of the seating bank would find its way back into the arena and cover the walls. So we felt justified in examining this hypothesis with the machine, and it proved to be absolutely correct. This mass of colluvial material, remembering the colluvium on the flank of the island, this mobile soil, which is obviously from now on has to be a major feature in any further work on Richborough, revealing this chamber here, revealing the arena wall itself, and undertaken by an extremely skilled machine driver. I have to give credit to Francis Chopper Olsen for his machine work. Absolutely fantastic. The big surprise on this section of arena wall, painted plaster in situ on the wall face. You see here, so the plaster over the chalk wall, thick plaster, and then a layer of thin plaster, which is then painted. You see there a black stripe separating panels with yellow and red patterning on either side. What this is, we don't know. What the patterning is, we don't know. Could be imitation marble, could be figures. I don't think it's geometric. But we had two highly skilled, internationally renowned actually paint conservators, Lisa Shekide and Stephen Rickaby, out to have a look at it and to record it, and they recorded it in intense detail. A palimpsest of 2 consecutive layers of paint applied to lime wash, the paint's applied dry, but here you can see the sort of checkerboard effect here. This is the brush applying the lime wash across and down, and then later the brush strokes here are applying the black vertical stripe. Lisa and Stephen's report is absolutely extraordinary. This nice red stripe here, the second scheme preserved that primary red stripe because the second layer of lime wash went up to the edge of it, as if they put lime wash over the top of it, it would all go pink. So, and they clearly didn't want that. So they're preserving aspects of the first. They could sell me anything, these two, actually. Brilliant. And we have this chamber. Well, it's very confusing because although it looks like a chamber, these walls are just built up against the natural sand. If anybody's got any idea about what this is all about, I would be very grateful. There is no back wall to this chamber. We've got this wall here. We've got a nice threshold there. There's been a gate here. We have this slot, which is presumably a timber slot, and a hole here which goes through all the way on a diagonal. If anyone's got any thoughts on this, it's got me stumped at the moment. But the image on the left is clearly what Fairholt illustrated in the 1850 book. This is that in plan. It's clear that where we are is where Mr. Rolfe was. In fact, you can see there the edge of Rolfe's wall following trench. He didn't dig out this wall here, he just recorded that in plan, but he did dig out this wall here and recorded it in elevation. Not only did he do that, but he showed us that he'd been here. My supervisor was taking the photograph of this wall, and although it had been exposed already for about 2 weeks, he just called me around and said, "Tony, have you seen what's on this wall?" And it was Mr. Rolfe's 1849 inscription telling us that he'd been there before, which we knew. If you look at this is a bit of a mess, but it is the resistivity survey with the excavation over the top of it, with the location of the walls that we uncovered. And this is Coleman's plan. I have great respect for Coleman as a surveyor because this is the magnetic correction, but if you bring this round a little bit more, just a few degrees further, those walls are smack on, and that wall is smack on that entrance there. So I've got Coleman, yep, good man. And this is how we finished on completion of the excavation. You can see the stepping that was achieved by Mr. Olson, our machine driver. And also, the section indicated by the arrow there, here is exactly what Fairholt illustrated. The robbing of the wall causing material from the robbing and the degradation of the arena wall falling down into the arena in this sort of triangular way, and then the colluvium coming down, covering to great depth, and Rolfe's trench just there cutting through it. So that's the whole story. And as you see, Rolfe, Roachsmith, Fairholt observed that here. This triangular business here confused us while we were preparing the work, what this could possibly be, but it is clearly what we picked up here in this section excavation. And obviously, no excavation of this kind is complete with a nice digital terrain model that you can switch around, but unfortunately I can't switch it around. I don't know how to switch it around in PowerPoint. So what about the back? What about the stuff at the back? What about these high magnetic anomalies here? Well, here we've got the excavation area and those walls accurately located over the magnetometry survey, and we're going to look now at the excavation, this area here, and going back. They weren't World War II features. This burned area here matches the area of high magnetic response, and in plan you can see that it reflects the curve of the back of the amphitheatre. At the same time, with this first machining off, in this area here, we recognise the fact that we had turf building. You see here, turfs, remains of Roman turf structure, not unlike the section here through the turf wall section of Hadrian's Wall, which we did an excavation on in 1999. And it transpired, in fact, that the rear wall of the amphitheatre was a turf wall. There are colleagues, Ben Russell and Tanya Romankovic in Edinburgh, who are running a project called Earthen Empires. We had them straight down to look at this, and they said it's some of the finest turf work they've seen in the Roman Empire. 6 metres wide, same width as the turf wall of Hadrian's Wall. There is no reason why this shouldn't be have been a sort of 3 metre high freestanding turf wall forming the back of the amphitheatre. Sampled extensively, of course, and starting to get an idea of where the turf actually came from. This very thin turf here, these very thin turfs, have got these little, you see the white pinheads in there. These are tiny mollusks which have already been identified as mollusks that like a salt marsh environment. So they're picking up an awful lot of turf, but they're also picking up this salt marsh turf, which is coming presumably from these areas which would have been salt marsh at that time, which are now agricultural land which needs constant drainage. Now, what does that tell us about the date? We were thinking, well, if you need all that turf, are you going to be able to collect that amount of turf when you've got a town there? Maybe not. Maybe it predates the town. We have the chalk masonry, the same as the temples, which we can see. The temples we can see are Roman. These are chalk walls. They're not the sort of Kentish ragstone you get for the Saxon Shore fort. So are they building this in turf and in chalk and in local materials before they start exploiting the ragstone quarries? There's a lot of dating work to be done to go into that idea. But the burning is a puzzle. We can't see a source of combustion. We can't see a structure which has burned there. But as you can see here, the turf is singed. On the fringe of this, you get the organic elements of the turf being singed. And it's almost as if from the original combustion here, you've got, and we actually proved it in one hole, which looked like we got a burnt post hole. We dug down into the burnt post hole and found the burnt material went underneath into the turf. It's almost like one of these peat fires that burn the organic material underneath and then pop up from time to time that you see in the burning of peat bogs, and then occasionally lumps of burned twig. There's a lot of work on the records and samples to be done to try and understand this phenomenon. And, here it is here. There are these little pockets of it here on the magnetometry survey. Are these places where the fire's gone under and then just popped up, which these fires in peat do? My colleagues are dubious about this, to be honest, but when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, etc., etc. As, again, looking at the date of the amphitheatre, Mortimer Wheeler thought with the Second Legion coming from Caerleon to Richborough, he did suggest in the Caerleon Amphitheatre report that perhaps the Second Legion had come and built the Richborough Amphitheatre to replace the one they were familiar with in Caerleon. I actually think not. As you look at the northern trench running off here, it's really rich in finds, 270 plus 4th century coins in the topsoil and in these features, in these large ditches that you've got running across the site. Exactly what we had on the geophysical survey, these ditches, that's that one. Features containing much animal bone, suggesting processing meat or leather. There's a certain amount of metalworking as well. Now, we expect Richborough to produce coinage. Bushe-Fox's excavations in 20s and 30s produced in excess of 56,000 coins, going right up to the very end, the latest coins of Roman Britain, and we have the same out here. And it's often been suggested from the Bushe-Fox excavation that the town shrank back towards the area of the Saxon Shore fort in the early 3rd century. But getting the 4th century material down here, and now getting a lot of 4th century material right up here, does seem to suggest more as if the town is still surviving to its full extent, unless there are areas of it which are keeping going and areas of it don't. To its full extent, right up into the end date of Roman Britain, right up to the Theodosian period and beyond. The only caveat for that is the fact that there is this little cemetery here of inhumation burials in nailed wooden coffins, and on this plan here, number 2, is an Antonine burial. It's a cremation in an amphora with Antonine date pottery in it here. And number 1 here, again Bushe-Fox, it's a wooden coffin burial under a mound which is cut by the walls of the Saxon Shore fort. And you'd normally expect, of course, burials to be outside the walls of the town. But as the excavations I've been talking about are the only excavations that have ever taken place on this town, the idea of expansion, contraction have to remain as ideas. So, what are English Heritage doing to the site? Well, the museum here, the extension which used to house the custodian, little house there, this has been completely gutted. It will be completely refitted as a new museum. The amphitheatre has previously been accessed across private land. A new access route here will be laid out to allow people to visit the earthwork of the amphitheatre anyway, from the fort and from the pay point, which will be down here. And also there is an intention to build a new viewing gallery. I think it's been started already, and that viewing platform will sit here on the footprint of the timber military gate, the Claudian timber gate, and will allow you to go to the fort and actually view all these complex earthworks from above, and will help the interpretation. There was an idea that they would replicate the great Quadrifon's monument, but they decided that a nice little Claudian gate in timber would be, well, cheaper for one thing. But there have been ideas. Oh, sorry. Back again. The amphitheatre excavation was backfilled. Before we did that, Rickaby and Shekeder have installed over the paint and over the plaster reversible conservation measures, which this looks horrific, but is actually entirely reversible over the painted plaster, then covered with a geotextile prior to backfilling. And my excavation team decided they wanted to replicate what Mr. Rolfe did, but in less good calligraphy and not on the fabric of the monument. So that's there for the next investigators in another 100 years. When it was first found, I've heard that it has been inquired what will be done on the amphitheatre, being fully open to view, and that one reverend gentleman has suggested that possibly no memorial to Mr. Rolfe could be more gratifying or congenial to his generous feelings than taking steps for permanently preserving the area and the walls of this amphitheatre for the public inspection in the future. Can this be done? Well, the answer is, sadly, no, it can't. But at least we know the answer. So finally, I'd like to thank the people who did all the hard work and yourselves for listening. Thank you.